What if everything you were ever taught about hell was wrong? What if the fire, the eternal punishment, the darkness with no way out? What if none of that is actually what happens after we leave this world? And what if the real answer is not only more logical, but actually more hopeful, more loving, and more transformative than anything religion ever told you? That is exactly what we are going to explore today, right here, together. Because today we are diving deep into Chapter 4 of Heaven and Hell by Allan Kardec. And honestly, this might be one of the most mind-opening chapters in the entire book. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Spiritist Light Journey. I am so glad you are here with me today. If you are new to this channel, first of all, huge hug to you. Seriously, welcome to this beautiful community. This channel is your space for spiritual growth, for understanding life beyond the physical world, for exploring the teachings of Spiritism in a way that is clear, warm, and genuinely transformative. And if you have been here before, you already know what we are about. No fear, no judgment, just light, learning, and love. Now, before we go any further, I want to make sure you do not miss a single episode of this series, because this is not just a standalone video. We are going through the entire book Heaven and Hell by Allan Kardec, chapter by chapter, and new episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at exactly 10 a.m. So if you have not subscribed yet, please do it right now. Hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and turn on all notifications so YouTube tells you the moment a new episode goes live. This series is going to change the way you see life, death, and everything in between. You do not want to miss a single piece of it. And if you are enjoying what we do here, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps more people find this content, and honestly, it means the world to this community. All right, let us get into it. So today we are talking about Chapter 4 of Heaven and Hell. And the chapter is literally called The Hell. And I know, just hearing that word, hell, can bring up a lot of things for people. Childhood memories of sermons, images of flames, fear, guilt, maybe even trauma around religion. And I want to acknowledge that right from the start. If that is part of your story, I see you, and I want you to know that what Allan Kardec presents in this chapter is going to feel like a breath of fresh air. Because the Spiritist view of hell is not what you think it is, not even close. Let me paint the picture that most of us grew up with first, just so we are on the same page. The traditional idea of hell, across many religious traditions, is a place of eternal punishment. You die, you are judged, and if you fall on the wrong side of that judgment, you are condemned forever. No second chances, no redemption. Just endless suffering in a pit of fire for eternity. That is it. Game over. Now, even as a child, a lot of us had questions about that. Does that really sound like something a loving God would create? Does it make sense that a soul could do something wrong in maybe 70 or 80 years of life on earth, and the consequence is literally infinite, never-ending punishment? There is something that just does not add up, and Kardec in Chapter 4 addresses this head-on. He does not dance around it. He goes straight into it with this incredibly thoughtful, deeply reasoned exploration of what hell really means. Not through the lens of fear and dogma, but through the lens of divine justice, moral evolution, and the nature of the spirit. And here is where things get really interesting. Kardec was not writing fiction. He was not making things up. He was compiling and organizing communications from spirits, beings who had already passed through the experience of death and were communicating their experiences back to us through mediums. What the spirits described about the afterlife, about suffering, about what we might call hell, it is nothing like the image of eternal flames. It is something far more nuanced, far more just, and far more hopeful. So here is the core idea that anchors this entire chapter, and I want you to really sit with this. In Spiritism, hell is not a place, it is a state. It is a condition of the spirit, And that changes everything. Think about that for a second. A place is fixed. A place has walls. A place you can be locked into forever. But a state can evolve. A state can change. A state is not permanent unless the being inside it refuses to grow. And that right there is the Spiritist view of hell in one sentence. It is a temporary state of moral and spiritual underdevelopment that the spirit itself perpetuates through its own choices and attachments. Now, I know that might sound abstract, so let us break it down together in a way that really makes it click. And as we do, I want to invite you right now to drop a comment below saying the word light. Just that one word. It tells me you are here, you are engaged, and it helps this video reach more people who are searching for exactly this kind of spiritual understanding. Come on, type it in. Light. I will be reading the comments. Okay. So Kardec in chapter 4 begins by establishing something foundational, and that is the relationship between divine justice and divine love. A lot of people think these two things are in tension, that justice means punishment and love means forgiveness, and somehow God has to balance between the two. But Kardec challenges that framing entirely. He says that true divine justice is not punitive. It is educational. It is restorative. The purpose of suffering in the Spiritist framework is never to hurt the spirit for the sake of hurting it. The purpose of any suffering is to help the spirit understand the consequences of its choices, to feel those consequences deeply enough that it genuinely wants to change. This is such a profound reframe. Imagine you are a parent, and your child does something harmful, something that hurts themselves or others. What is the goal of your response as a parent? Is it to make that child suffer as much as possible, forever, as payback? Of course not. If you are a loving parent, your goal is for your child to understand what they did, to feel genuine remorse, and to grow from the experience. The consequence you allow them to face is in service of their growth, not in service of your anger or sense of justice. Kardec is essentially saying that God operates the same way, but at a cosmic, infinite scale, and with perfect wisdom. The suffering that souls experience after death, when they have lived lives of selfishness, cruelty, moral ignorance, that suffering is real. Kardec does not minimize it. The spirits who communicated through mediums described it in vivid, sometimes heart-wrenching terms. But it is not eternal, it is not arbitrary, and it is not the end of the road. Let us talk about what that suffering actually looks like, because this is where the chapter gets really fascinating. And if you are finding this helpful so far, share this video with someone in your life who you think might benefit from hearing this. You know, someone who has wrestled with the idea of hell, someone who has been hurt by rigid religious teachings, someone who is searching for a more loving framework for understanding what comes after this life. Send it to them. It might be exactly what they need. All right. So what does the Spiritist view of hell actually look like in practice? What are these inferior spiritual states that some souls find themselves in after death? Kardec draws from a rich body of spirit communications to paint a picture of several different kinds of post-mortem suffering. And none of them involve literal fire and brimstone, but all of them are deeply real and deeply meaningful. The first and perhaps most common form of suffering described is what we might call the suffering of moral darkness. When a spirit has lived a life dominated by selfishness, by cruelty, by a total disregard for others, that spirit carries all of that with it into the spiritual world. Remember, in Spiritism, the spirit does not just drop its personality and its character when the physical body dies. It takes everything with it. Its memories, its habits of thought, its emotional patterns, its moral state. All of it comes along for the journey. So imagine a spirit that spent its earthly life deceiving people, accumulating wealth at the expense of others, indulging every selfish impulse without a single thought for the consequences. That spirit, when it crosses over, is still that spirit. It still has those same thoughts, those same cravings, those same habits. But now, it is in a realm where physical indulgence is no longer possible. You cannot eat, you cannot drink, you cannot possess material things. And yet, the craving is still there. The attachment is still there. And the gap between what the spirit craves and what it can access, that gap is a form of suffering. It is not external punishment imposed by God. It is internal suffering arising directly from the spirit's own unresolved attachments and moral state. Kardec describes this beautifully through the accounts of spirits themselves. Some spirits after death find themselves in a kind of fog, unable to see clearly, unable to understand where they are or what has happened to them, wandering in confusion and disorientation. This happens particularly to spirits who were very materialistic in their earthly lives, those who refused to believe in anything beyond the physical world, who mocked spiritual things, who tied every bit of their identity to the material. When the material is gone, they are lost. They genuinely do not understand what has happened. They sometimes do not even realize they have died. And this is such a compassionate and logical explanation, because it is not that God decided these spirits deserve to be confused and lost as a punishment. It is that the spirit's own choices during life created a state of being that naturally leads to that confusion after death. It is cause and effect at the deepest possible level. What you cultivate in your soul during life is what you carry with you. Now, this might sound discouraging, but here is the part that is so important, and it is the part that makes Spiritism so radically different from the idea of eternal damnation. These states are not permanent. Not a single one of them is fixed forever. The spirit, even in the darkest and most confused state, retains its free will. It retains the capacity to reflect, to feel remorse, to want something better. And the moment that movement begins, the moment a spirit sincerely turns toward the light, toward goodness, toward love, the process of elevation begins. It might be gradual. It might take time. In the spiritual world, time works differently than it does here, but the door is never closed, ever. That is the message at the heart of this chapter, and I want you to really feel that. The door is never closed, not for any spirit, not for the most hardened, the most selfish, the most morally lost, because God's love, and I'm using that word in the most expansive, universal sense, God's love does not run out. It does not have conditions or expiration dates. It is infinite, and it is always waiting. Now let us go a little deeper into some of the specific spirit accounts that Kardec presents, because this is where the chapter becomes almost cinematic. These are not abstract theological arguments. These are actual accounts, spirits describing their own experiences, and they are sometimes haunting, sometimes heartbreaking, and ultimately always instructive. One of the recurring themes in the spirit communication cited in this chapter is the experience of what we might call moral confrontation. When a spirit enters the spiritual realm, it often faces a kind of total clarity about its own life, a clarity that was not available during physical existence. It sees itself as it truly was. It sees the people it hurt. It feels genuinely and deeply the pain it caused others, not as an abstract memory, but as a lived experience. Some spirits describe this as one of the most intense forms of suffering possible. To see clearly, with no capacity for self-deception, exactly what you did and who you were. And that might sound harsh, but think about it. Is that not also one of the most powerful engines of transformation possible? When you can no longer hide from yourself, when you can no longer rationalize or justify or look away, that is when real change becomes possible. That is when the spirit, often for the first time, truly wants to be different. Not because it is being forced, not because it is afraid of punishment, but because it genuinely sees and feels the truth of its own actions. That internal recognition is the beginning of redemption. I want to pause here and ask you, does this resonate with you? Have you ever had a moment in your own life where you were confronted with a really uncomfortable truth about yourself, and instead of it crushing you, it actually sparked something in you, a desire to do better, to be better? Drop a comment below and share that. I genuinely want to hear from you. These conversations in the comments are one of my favorite things about this community. We learn from each other here. And if you are not subscribed yet, seriously, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe right now, turn on notifications, because Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 a.m., we are going deeper and deeper into this incredible book together. Let us keep going, because we are just getting to the really rich part of this chapter. Kardec goes beyond just describing the states of suffering. He also addresses some of the most difficult theological questions that arise when you start thinking seriously about divine justice. And one of the big ones is this: if God is all-knowing and all-loving, why does suffering exist at all? Why would any soul be allowed to go through darkness and pain, whether in physical life or in the spiritual realm? And this is where Kardec's answer is so elegant and so coherent. He says that suffering is not something God inflicts. Suffering is something that arises naturally and inevitably from the misuse of freedom. God gave spirits free will, real, genuine free will, not a performance of free will where only one choice is actually acceptable. Real freedom means the capacity to choose wrongly, and when spirits choose wrongly, persistently, over long periods of time, the natural consequences of those choices accumulate into states of moral and spiritual suffering. It is not punishment, it is physics. Spiritual physics. Think of it like this: if you put your hand on a hot stove, your hand gets burned. That is not punishment from the stove. The stove is not angry at you. The burning is simply the natural consequence of your action, meeting the laws of physical reality. Kardec is saying that something similar operates in the spiritual realm. Selfishness, cruelty, dishonesty, a total disregard for the well-being of others. These are not just morally wrong in some abstract sense. They are spiritually damaging to the spirit that practices them. They create a state of being that naturally leads to suffering, both in life and after death. Not because God is punishing the spirit, but because the spirit has placed itself in misalignment with the fundamental laws of love and truth that govern existence. And here is the flip side of that, which is just as important. When a spirit begins to align itself with those laws, when it begins to cultivate love, compassion, honesty, generosity, it begins to experience a corresponding elevation in its state of being. The suffering diminishes, the fog lifts, the spirit begins to perceive more light, more beauty, more connection. Again, not as a reward externally granted, but as a natural consequence of internal alignment. This framework has such profound implications for how we live our lives right now, today, in this physical existence. Because what Kardec is really saying is that every choice we make is shaping our spirit. Every moment of genuine kindness, every decision to be honest even when lying would be easier, every time we choose compassion over cruelty. All of that is not just good behavior. It is spiritual development. It is the literal evolution of our soul. And that gives everyday life this incredible depth and meaning, does it not? It is not just about following rules to avoid hell. It is about genuinely becoming something greater. It is about the continuous, beautiful, sometimes difficult journey of the spirit toward its highest potential. That is what Spiritism is really about. Not fear, not punishment, growth. Now, Chapter 4 also addresses something that I find really fascinating, and that is the role of other spirits, more elevated beings, in relation to those who are suffering. Because in the Spiritist model, the spiritual world is not just populated by the spirits of people who have died. There are also highly evolved spirits, beings of great wisdom, compassion, and light, who are constantly working to assist those who are struggling. Think of them as a kind of spiritual support system. They do not force the suffering spirit to change. They cannot. Free will is inviolable, but they surround those spirits with love. They offer guidance. They create opportunities for reflection and awareness. They plant seeds of light even in the darkest spiritual states. This is one of the most beautiful aspects of Spiritist cosmology, in my opinion. Nobody is abandoned. No spirit, regardless of how dark its state, is left alone without support. There are always more elevated beings working with love and patience, sometimes across extraordinarily long periods of time, from our perspective, helping even the most fallen spirits find their way back to the light. And this connects to something important in Spiritism, the practice of charity prayers, of sending healing thoughts and intentions to spirits who are suffering. In the Spiritist tradition, prayer for suffering spirits is not just a nice gesture. It is genuinely effective. The love and intention directed toward a suffering spirit can actually assist it, can help open it up to the guidance of the elevated spirits around it. This is why in Spiritist centers all over the world, this kind of intercessory prayer is practiced regularly and with great seriousness. Let me also address something that Kardec brings up in this chapter that I think is really important, especially for people coming from religious backgrounds where hell is presented as God's judgment and God's wrath. Kardec explicitly rejects the idea that God judges in a punitive, retributive way. He says that God does not condemn. The spirit, through its own choices and the state those choices have created, places itself in its own spiritual condition. The spirit's own conscience, which in the spiritual realm is fully transparent and cannot be suppressed or denied, is far more effective as a teacher than any external punishment could ever be. Think about how different that is from the image of a wrathful God sending sinners to burn forever. In Kardec's framework, God is not sitting in judgment like a stern magistrate. God is more like the fundamental principle of love and truth that underlies all of existence. And the further a spirit is from love and truth, the more it suffers, because it is suffering from its own distance from the source of all good. And the closer it moves toward love and truth, the more it thrives. If this chapter is resonating with you, and I really hope it is, please share this video right now. Share it on your social media, send it to a friend, put it in a group chat. This kind of content needs to reach more people who are ready for a more loving, more rational, more hopeful understanding of spiritual reality. You sharing this is how that happens. Thank you for being part of this mission. Now I want to spend some time on something that Kardec explores in depth in this chapter, and that is the spectrum of spiritual states that we might broadly categorize as hell. Because it is not a monolithic thing. Not all difficult spiritual states are the same, and understanding the range of them helps us understand the Spiritist view much more clearly. At one end of the spectrum, you have spirits who are in what we might call mild states of difficulty. Spirits who were not particularly evil in their earthly lives, but who were perhaps shallow, materialistic, spiritually indifferent. These spirits after death find themselves in states of confusion, uncertainty, or a kind of grey monotony. They are not in agony, but they are not at peace either. They are in a kind of limbo of their own making, waiting, often without even knowing what they are waiting for some spark of genuine spiritual awareness to ignite within them. Kardec describes accounts of spirits in this state as being almost bored, which might sound funny, but actually makes complete sense. If your entire earthly existence was organized around physical pleasures, material accumulation, and surface-level social engagement, and then you find yourself in a realm where none of that is available, what is left? For a spirit, that has not developed its inner life, its capacity for genuine connection, its intellectual and moral depth, there is not much there. And that emptiness is its own form of suffering. In the middle of the spectrum, you have spirits who did cause genuine harm to others, who were cruel, dishonest, exploitative. These spirits tend to be in states of much more acute suffering. They carry the weight of what they did. They feel with terrible clarity the pain they caused. And in some accounts, Kardec describes spirits in this category as being unable to escape the presence of those they harmed. Not literally, but in a deeply psychological and spiritual sense. The faces of those they hurt are always with them. The suffering they caused echoes back through their own consciousness. And this is so psychologically real, is it not? Even in our physical lives, we know that guilt, real, genuine guilt about real harm we have caused, is one of the most uncomfortable states a human being can be in. It does not just go away. It lives with you. It wakes you up at 3 in the morning. In the spiritual realm, without the distractions of physical life, without the ability to keep busy and push things away, that moral reckoning is fully present, fully felt. That is the hell that these spirits are living. At the far end of the spectrum are the spirits that Kardec describes as the most deeply fallen. Beings who have cultivated, over perhaps many lifetimes, a profound orientation toward darkness, toward cruelty, toward the domination and suffering of others. In some spirit communications cited in the chapter, these beings are described in almost terrifying terms, not because they are damned forever, but because the depth of their spiritual degradation is genuinely profound. They are in states of extreme suffering, extreme darkness, extreme distance from anything resembling the divine. But even here, even at this extreme, Kardec is clear. The door is still open. It may take an extraordinarily long time. The resistance may be immense, but the spark of divine origin that is within every spirit, no matter how darkened, no matter how buried under layers of selfishness and cruelty, that spark cannot be entirely extinguished. It is always there, and eventually it always prevails. This is one of the most radical and hopeful claims in all of Spiritism. No soul is permanently lost. None. Now let us talk about what Chapter 4 means for us as living human beings. Because this is not just interesting metaphysics, it has deeply practical implications for how we choose to live. The first implication is this: what you do matters. Every choice you make, every way you treat another human being, every internal moral battle you win or lose, it all shapes your spiritual state. Not just your reputation, not just how people see you, your actual inner reality, your actual spiritual substance. You are literally building your soul with every choice. And the soul you build in this life is the soul you will carry with you after death. The second implication is that compassion for difficult people becomes spiritually logical. When you encounter someone who is deeply selfish, deeply cruel, deeply lost in their own darkness, the Spiritist perspective invites you to see them not just as a bad person who deserves to be written off, but as a spirit in a state of deep suffering, a spirit whose darkness is hurting them as much as it is hurting others. That does not mean you have to tolerate harm. You protect yourself and others from harm. But it changes the inner texture of how you relate to difficult people. There is room for compassion alongside clear boundaries. The third implication is about our relationship with the dead. In Spiritism, those who have passed are not simply gone. They continue to exist. Some of them may be in states of difficulty, and our prayers, our love, our sincere intentions directed toward them can genuinely assist them. This transforms grief. It gives you something active and meaningful to do with the love you still feel for people who have left the physical plane. You can still help them. Love does not end at death. And the fourth implication, maybe the most personal and immediate, is about your own inner life. If you are carrying guilt about things you have done in your past, if you have caused harm and are living with that weight, the Spiritist message is not condemnation, it is transformation. The same mechanism that leads suffering spirits toward eventual elevation is available to you right now, in this life. Genuine remorse, sincere commitment to change, concrete actions to repair harm where possible. These are not just good ideas, they are the mechanism of spiritual evolution. You can begin your elevation right now, today, in this moment. Are you feeling the depth of this? Because I really hope so. This is why I love Spiritism so much. It is not a religion that tells you to be afraid. It is a philosophy that tells you to grow. It is not about avoiding hell through ritual compliance. It is about genuinely becoming a more loving, more truthful, more compassionate being, because that is what you truly are at your deepest level. It is about returning to what you actually are. Hit that like button if this is landing for you. And if you have not already, drop a comment below. Tell me something this video made you think about, or just say hello. I genuinely read every single comment, and this community means everything to me. We are in the final stretch of our exploration of Chapter 4, and I want to make sure we tie together some of the most important threads before we close out. Because I think there are a few things in this chapter that are so important, they deserve to be said clearly and directly, without any ambiguity. The first is this: Allan Kardec's vision in heaven and hell, and specifically in this chapter on the concept of hell, is not nihilism. He is not saying that there are no consequences for how we live. He is not saying it does not matter what you do, because everything will be fine in the end anyway. That would be a misreading. The consequences are real. The suffering is real. The difficulty of elevation for a deeply fallen spirit is real. Kardec does not sugarcoat any of that. He presents it with honesty and with the full weight of the accounts he is drawing from. But, and this is the crucial but, the consequences are always in service of growth. The suffering is never gratuitous. The difficulty is the curriculum, not the punishment. And the outcome, always for every single spirit, is eventually elevation. The question is not whether you will get there. The question is how long it takes and how much you suffer along the way. And that how long it takes, how much you suffer, that is substantially determined by the choices you make, both in physical life and in the spiritual realm. That is the combination of divine justice and divine love that Kardec is articulating. Justice, because choices have consequences that are real and proportionate and deeply felt. Love, because the consequences always point toward healing and growth, and because no soul is ever permanently abandoned. The second big takeaway I want to leave you with from this chapter is about the nature of divine love itself. Kardec's God, if we can use that word, is not a being who sits in judgment and issues verdicts of condemnation. Kardec describes the divine as the source of infinite love, infinite wisdom, and infinite patience. A God who condemns eternally would be a God whose love has limits. But in the Spiritist framework, divine love has no limits. It reaches into the darkest spiritual states. It works through elevated spirits, through inspired human beings, through the still small voice of conscience that can never be permanently silenced. It is always there, always reaching, always waiting, and this matters so much for the emotional and spiritual lives of people who were raised in fear-based religious frameworks. If you were taught that you are one wrong move away from eternal damnation, that every sin might be the one that tips you into permanent separation from God, that is an incredibly heavy burden to carry. And a lot of people carry it, consciously or unconsciously, through their entire lives. Kardec is gently, lovingly setting that burden down. He is saying, you are not one wrong move away from anything permanent. You are a spirit on a long journey of evolution, and every step, even the steps backward, is ultimately part of the journey toward the light. Now, I also want to talk about something that is implicit throughout chapter 4, and that is the idea of spiritual responsibility. Because it would be easy to take the message of universal eventual elevation and turn it into a kind of spiritual laziness. Well, everyone gets there eventually, so why bother trying hard right now? But that would completely miss the point. Think of it this way. Yes, every soul eventually arrives at elevation, but the journey between where you are now and that elevation can be shorter or longer, easier or harder, more or less filled with suffering. And that is substantially in your hands. Choosing to grow now, choosing to cultivate love and truth and compassion in this lifetime, choosing to face and work through your own darkness rather than projecting it onto others. All of that accelerates your journey. It makes it less painful. It makes it more beautiful. It creates ripples of positive effect that extend not just to your own spirit, but to everyone around you. Spiritism is deeply optimistic about human potential. It says that every single person alive right now has within them the capacity for extraordinary moral and spiritual growth, and every step of that growth matters, not just for your own journey, but for the collective journey of all spirits, because we are all connected. When any one of us grows, it makes it easier for others to grow. When any of us chooses love over fear, truth over self-deception, compassion over cruelty, we are contributing to the elevation of the whole. That is such a beautiful vision, is it not? Your personal spiritual choices are not just personal, they ripple outward, they matter. I want to close this exploration of chapter 4 with something that I find deeply moving in the way Kardec concludes his argument. He essentially says, look at the beauty of this system, look at the coherence of it. A universe governed by love that never gives up on any soul. A system of justice that always serves growth rather than punishment. A cosmos in which nothing is wasted, not a single experience, not a single mistake, not a single moment of suffering, because all of it is material for the evolution of the spirit. The so-called hell of Spiritism is not a dungeon. It is a school. A difficult school, sometimes a heartbreaking school, but a school nonetheless. And like all schools, you graduate. Maybe not quickly, maybe not easily, but you graduate. And what you learn in that school becomes part of you, permanently, in a way that no superficial learning ever could. This is what Allan Kardec Heaven and Hell Chapter 4 is really about. This is the Spiritist view of hell explained, not as a place of eternal damnation, but as a state of temporary suffering that always leads somewhere better. This is Allan Kardec Hell explained, not through fear, but through love and logic and a breathtaking trust in the ultimate goodness at the heart of existence. And that, my friends, is why I am so grateful we are going through this book together. Because this kind of understanding does not just satisfy intellectual curiosity, it changes how you live. It changes how you see the people around you. It changes how you face your own darkness, your own mistakes, your own journey. It gives you hope, real, grounded, rational hope that this life and everything beyond it is moving in a direction that is ultimately good. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. This is exactly why Spiritist Light Journey exists, to bring this kind of light into the world, one episode at a time. Now here is what I need you to do before you close this video. If this episode added something to your life, if it made you think, if it gave you peace, if it sparked something, please hit that like button right now. It is the simplest thing you can do, and it makes an enormous difference in helping more people find this content. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already, and turn on all notifications. We drop new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at exactly 10 a.m., and we are going through every single chapter of Heaven and Hell together. You do not want to miss what is coming next. Each chapter builds on the last, and the picture that emerges is truly extraordinary. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what was the most powerful idea from today's episode? What shifted for you? Or share a question you have about Spiritism. I love reading your questions, and they often inspire future episodes. Share this video with someone who needs it. You know someone in your life who is wrestling with fear, with guilt, with questions about what happens after we die. Send them this video. It might be exactly the message they have been waiting for. And if you want to go back to the beginning of this series, the full playlist for Heaven and Hell is right here on the channel. Just look for the Heaven and Hell playlist and you can watch every episode in order. That is the best way to experience the full journey of this incredible book. I will see you in the next episode. Until then, keep walking in the light, keep choosing love, keep growing. You are a spirit on an eternal journey, and every step matters. God bless you all. See you soon on Spiritist Light Journey.